Hey guys, welcome back. Yesterday we started our lesson on the president's role in his or her powers. We will keep moving on through that today. As a quick review, we asked you about your favorite president and difficulty of the job. We covered the basic qualifications of the president and the vice president, and we also looked at the order of succession. For today, we're going to look at the role of the president and his or her powers. Let's start with the president's role. I created three large categories for this that include being a legislative leader, the commander-in-chief, and a foreign policy leader. If you take a quick look, you will notice that most of the powers are checked heavily by Congress, such as sending military to other countries or even accepting judges. Many times Congress has to approve what the president does. But as I say this, I can kind of dial that back to say that although there are checks on the power, many times the president does what he wants. But anyway, we'll get to that later. First, as a legislative leader, the president can suggest laws. Congress has to be the one to approve it, though, which then goes back to the president to, again, approve it. That doesn't mean Trump can't be a cheerleader for whatever he wants to pass or make an executive order even to bypass Congress, but just remember that Congress are the ones that make the laws. Another role as a legislative leader is giving the country a State of the Union address, which does just that. It's just letting everybody know what's going on and how everything's going. It's usually televised in late January, and it talks about programs and policies that the president wants Congress to put into effect. It also talks about anything that might be of pressing concern. Another role the president can have is vetoing or pocket vetoing legislation. Remember, we did talk about this last chapter as well. It ultimately rejects what Congress passes, but remember, Congress can also then go back and override the president's veto with a 2/3 vote. Last, the president can propose budgets. Trump or Biden can, as a cheerleader with what they call soft power, say, please, oh please, Congress, can you pass this law or can you pass this budget? Can you raise money this way? But Congress doesn't have to listen. They can or cannot or can listen to some things. It's totally up to Congress. So with a lot of things we talk about, even that I have listed on this PowerPoint slide, many times the president can urge people to do things, but he can't actually make them. The other big category and the other role is as commander-in-chief. And this role is much more clear than some of the other ones where he has soft power. This is something he actually controls. The president is the head of the armed forces. All military officers during war and peace answer to the president. The president is in constant contact with the U.S. military leaders and has the final say in planning how the war is to be fought. Now, Congress has to be the one to officially declare war, and we've done this about 5 times with the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, and the World Wars. But you could technically say 11 times if you count the countries. Stay with me now, though. What the president can do is use military force, and he is supposed to get congressional approval to do it before, during, or after. Currently, we are in 7 different conflicts, and historically, we've literally been in hundreds. But let me say again, Congress has declared war the 5 times, or 11 if you want to be technical in the countries. So what about the 7 we're in now? What about the hundreds historically? And if we want to go further, in fact, the U.S. has kind of been in war for our entire history. And don't trust me, let's just take a look quickly. Although the president sends forces wherever he or she thinks U.S. interests are threatened, this power is somewhat limited, but the president mostly has control and mostly has done whatever he's wanted to do, even despite Congress and even despite the United Nations sometimes. Now, the check in place is supposed to be the War Powers Resolution. Congress would pass this in 1973, and this would make it so the president needs congressional approval to do some of these things. And if not, the president needs to return the troops within 60 days, or maybe even 90 if that would lead to a safer departure. Another thing worth mentioning is that many times presidents do wacky things during times of war or any emergency. One quick example is the Patriot Act, and that would allow government to spy on its citizens. It does have a nice rationale. We can find terrorists or spot terrorists, but pretty much popular opinion is totally against this now in 2020. But that's not the case right after 9/11. Where most people supported it. Another example is Obama creating kill lists of terrorists without congressional approval, and then using drones to take people out across the world. Trump would also continue this as well. I don't think he had the fancy name like Obama, though. Public opinion is split on this because, of course, you do get bad guys, but should we get every bad guy in the world? Are we allowed to be the policeman of the world? The United Nations is definitely against it, and it is against international law, but is that okay? Like if Obama or Trump take out an international bad guy, if we take out Osama bin Laden and Congress didn't approve it, is that okay? If Trump takes out Soleimani, is that okay? This is an open question in our country. I would say internationally, most countries are against it. I would say the United Nations is against it. Some in our country are against it, and some in our country are for it. The last role that the president has is a foreign policy leader. The president must give constant attention to U.S. foreign policy, and this may be the toughest job of them all. Foreign policy is just the government's plan for interacting with other countries of the world. The actions the US takes really impacts nations everywhere else, and the actions they take also impact us. This is a very tricky one because historically the US has done really great things for other countries and really awful things that harm them and hurt them and still impact their countries today. A quick positive example of US intervention could be rebuilding Europe after the World Wars, but a quick negative example could be the US interventions in Latin America. This is a tricky balance that all major empires have, like the US, the UK, Germany, Russia, China, Japan, France, and I could keep going. They all attempt to support their own interests, and they all kind of look at themselves as doing good. And in some sense, they're right, but they're not fully right when any of them are in other nations committing atrocities. Interestingly enough, on this note, the Worldwide Gallup poll actually has shown that people believe around the world that the U.S. is actually the greatest threat to world peace. So whether this is true or not, some believe it to be true. So something we should reflect and ask ourselves is, well, why do they think that? The president needs to secure friendly relations with other countries while also preserving national security. The president appoints diplomats to travel and represent the government in other nations and also travel to meet with leaders himself. When we meet with other leaders, it's called diplomacy. The president can make executive agreements and negotiate treaties, but Congress actually has to be the one to make it and pass it. So to sum up his job as a foreign policy leader, he appoints officials, he travels, he sends others to travel, he executes or carries out any treaties made, and he attempts to create positive relationships with others. Now that we looked at what a president does and can do, let's see what people think the president actually does. To start, many think for some reason that Bush or Obama or Trump can control gas prices or stock markets or create millions of jobs. There's other examples too that people commonly get wrong, but I'm just going to use these. If we want to be honest, they have what is called soft power, and most times they have a small role in this. They are a factor. They're not nothing, but they're not really too much. For example, a president can attempt to work out deals with other oil-rich nations, but this could also backfire. Many times it's what the companies or the corporations want, and that's probably based on supply and demand and their own revenue. And I will not say the invisible hand because we actually get the Adam Smith's invisible hand wrong all the time if you actually read what he writes about the invisible hand. So of course there's other factors involved as well, but it's definitely not Bush, Obama, or Trump pulling a lever to make gas go up or down. The same can be said about the stock market, which is already a weird one that we always look to as a country as a good measurement. Well, maybe we can look at like income or happiness or clean water or education or life expectancy or infant mortality rate. Do you know what I'm getting at? There's many things we can look at, but for whatever reason we look at the stock market, which most people don't even have money in savings to attempt to even invest their money in that. In fact, 40% of our population doesn't even have $400 saved up in case of an emergency. So isn't it kind of like laughable to say that stocks are a great measurement when so many live paycheck to paycheck? Anyway, so the stock market goes up or down, which we've already declared is already a weird measurement. How does a speech from Bush or Obama or Trump or Biden dictate if I take $2,000 of my money and go invest it towards Apple? Another common one you hear about presidents is creating jobs, which they sort of can do, but they definitely don't do it in the numbers that they claim in speeches. A quick example is Trump creating Space Force. Now, that created jobs, legitimately. That was accurate. But one not so accurate statement was when he claimed credit for Tim Cook opening a business in Texas. That would be based on geographical planning or perhaps the taxes or the laws that they have there, regulations or deregulations that they might have in Texas different costs, again, supply, demand, and even what Tim Cook and other board members would want. So let's just be a little bit skeptical of some of the things that politicians say. So anyway, recent polling shows what Americans think presidents influence, such as international opinions, and I would say sort of, since they're the head of the nation. The next one is federal budget deficit, which they can propose, right? And they can give to Congress, they can set their priorities and beg and be a cheerleader, but Congress is the one that decides that ultimately, right? Taxes is the next one, which again, Congress decides. Next one is healthcare costs, which are outrageous in our nation. It's not a secret. I think the left and the right both complain about this now, and maybe something will be done in the future. But anyway, that's created by the businesses, that's created by insurance companies. Again, it's created by consumers that are willing to pay for it. There's a lot of blame to go around for these. But it's not a secret to know that healthcare prices are extremely jacked up and don't even compare to other nations. But again, another factor that could help this a lot could be Congress, not necessarily the president. The next one is gas prices. We went over that already. Next one is inflation, which, the government, banks, the Federal Reserve, they all have an influence in that. Next one is interest rates. I think, again, the best the president can do is maybe go meet with some people, which sometimes they do, and plead with them and beg them and be a cheerleader. He could go to banks and lenders and so on, but he doesn't control that. Same thing with the last one. It says housing prices. He can plead, but that's about it. So as you can tell, we get a lot of things wrong. Anyway, let's continue looking at the president's power. One big one is making federal appointments. The Senate, of course, has to approve these, but the president has a great power of influence over the courts if he gets his people in. Remember, the Senate does have to approve that. Another huge one is just having executive power in general, such as privilege and even executive orders. This essentially makes the president a lawmaker. Congress does so much, but this is a way the president can do even more. And he can even do some things that maybe some Americans think that he does regularly. So executive power in general allows a wide range of power, such as Jefferson buying the Louisiana Purchase or Lincoln locking up 1,300 people without a trial. Another example is Obamacare. Another example with Trump is passing the 1776 Commission. War powers are another huge executive power that presidents carry out without permission from Congress. Remember, they're supposed to get approval, but sometimes they don't listen, whether it's, again, Bush or Obama or Trump. And as I said before, the United Nations and other global organizations are critical when our presidents do this too, but once again, sometimes they just do what they would like, and even sometimes against popular opinion. Examples of war powers include sending troops to Korea or Vietnam or Panama or Iraq twice or Afghanistan and so on. Many political science scholars criticize Congress for allowing the presidents to actually do these actions and carry them out, and for backing down all too often. Now, let's pay special attention to executive orders. This is a formal order to government to carry out a directive from the president. In total, the presidents have issued around 14,000 executive orders, and typically presidents sign 30 to 80 a year. And you can see a list of these that presidents have done or that Trump has done here. And when you take a look at the Federal Register, this has a bunch of executive orders, and it's really cool because this is a point when you can get away from the nonsense, you can get away from what the media says, whether right-leaning or left-leaning, and you can get away from what like Facebook or memes say. This is a point where you don't have to guess, if someone invested in a stock, if someone opened up a business, how much did Trump have or not have to do with this? This is directly from the president. So this is a great place where you can really admire and love the president or really hate and criticize the president, right? Because this is something that they do on their own. It's an executive order. So if gas prices go up or down, how much does Trump have to do with that? That's a super tough one, hard to measure, and probably not all that much, right? But if you check out executive orders, you can be much more critical for better or for worse. So check it out, super cool. Other historic executive orders include the Emancipation Proclamation, reservations, Japanese internment, and even the integration of schools in Little Rock. Other examples of executive privilege include Obama's kill list without congressional approval, as I said before, and Trump not really having a fancy name, as I said before, but doing the same thing. One last executive power is granting reprieves, pardons, and commutations. A reprieve postpones the carrying out of a person's sentence, while a commutation reduces the person's sentence. The easiest one to remember is a pardon, which just forgives the person of his or her wrongdoing, and then their punishment is eliminated. This is something that presidents do, and Trump and Obama both have been highly criticized for doing it. Ironically, the right-leaning outlets such as Fox have been super critical of Obama when he's done it, while saying little about Trump doing it. Wow, the same thing can be said on the other side, with left-leaning media being super harsh on Trump, but not really saying anything about Obama. This isn't a secret in my class that I try to point these things out, and I try to give you other resources to help you navigate through this. Remember, you can check out Ground News, you can check out All Sides, and you can check Media Bias Fact Check. These are great resources, and again, I would bookmark them on your laptops. They're amazing. Now, the last thing I want us to look at are president approval ratings. Interestingly enough, and kind of predictable, you guys should get it at this time, many times they average around 50%, or at least at certain times. And you can kind of guess that has a lot to do with the political divide that we're in and that we've been in. Sometimes they go much higher or much lower due to some big event such as, 9/11. Alrighty, so that's all I have for today. Let's look at the review questions. Number 1, what are the qualifications to be a president or the vice president, since they're the same? Number 2, identify several duties of the president and vice president. Number 3, describe the order of succession for the presidency. Now remember to answer these questions in comments on Google Classroom, and then after, complete your end of the lesson questions on Google Forms. When we return, guys, you will have a reading on the executive departments and agencies, and then we're going to cover that in more depth and wrap up Chapter 6. It was a quick one. After that, we go over the last branch, the judicial branch. As always, let me know if you have any questions, especially considering how many controversies there are with presidents and even with Trump. Send me an email with any questions or comments or any disagreements as well. And we can work that out and we can have an awesome conversation about it, okay? Have a good one, guys. Thanks for watching. Bye.